The Pacific Ocean during World War II was a vast battlefield where nations fought for survival and steel warships clashed under burning tropical skies. In the middle of that struggle, a single modest ship would achieve something no other vessel in history has ever done. This is the story of the USS England, a destroyer escort that in less than 2 weeks hunted down and sank 6 enemy submarines. Between May 19th and May 31st of 1944, this lone American ship turned into a relentless hunter, wiping out an entire line of Japanese subs and proving how deadly the new anti-submarine weapons had become. But this tale is not only about machines or tactics. It is a story of courage, sharp minds, and innovation, all meeting at a moment when the stakes could not be higher. And strangely enough, it did not begin with booming guns or roaring engines, but in silence, inside an ordinary-looking building in Pearl Harbor. On May 13, 1944, a group of American codebreakers intercepted a Japanese radio message. It seemed harmless at first, a routine update from submarine I-16 reporting an arrival time near Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. Yet to the trained ears of U.S. intelligence officers, it was far from ordinary. That simple message gave them a chance to strike directly at Japan's hidden fleet. The roots of this moment stretched back years. From the early days of the war, teams of brilliant men and women had worked in secret to crack Japanese naval codes. In windowless rooms filled with paper, machines, and endless calculations, they searched for patterns in enemy signals. Their skill had already helped win at Midway and in the Solomons, but this would be the first time their work would guide ships straight to enemy submarines. Breaking Japan's naval code, known as JN-25, was no simple task. It demanded more than math. It needed cultural insight, language knowledge, and endless patience. Every message had to be captured, logged, studied, and slowly unlocked using both machines and human intuition. Once solved, the intelligence was passed through secure channels to the U.S. Third Fleet and into the hands of Commander Hamilton Haines, who led Escort Division 39 from Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Commander Hamilton Haines was no stranger to submarine hunting. Before coming to the Pacific, he had faced German U-boats in the Atlantic, and that hard-earned experience was about to become priceless. Wasting no time, he organized a hunter-killer group built for one purpose: to track down and destroy enemy submarines. 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts were chosen: USS George, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just, USS Raby under Lieutenant Commander James Scott, and USS England led by Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton. England was temporarily detached from her own division at Purvis Bay to join the mission. On May 18, 1944, the 3 ships sailed out, with Haines aboard USS George as overall commander. These vessels had not been picked at random. They were among the best trained and best equipped ships for anti-submarine warfare. Their crews had spent months in the Solomons, practicing every maneuver, rehearsing attack patterns, and drilling sonar teams until their reflexes became second nature. Though many of the sailors were young and had not yet seen battle, their preparation was about to be tested in ways none could have imagined. But this hunt was only part of a far greater game. That very same day, new radio intelligence revealed a troubling discovery. The Japanese had deployed a line of 7 submarines, stretched in a long arc between the Admiralty Islands near New Guinea and Truk in the Carolines. This picket line, known as the NA line, sat directly across the route the U.S. fleet was expected to use in its next major offensive. Japan's commanders did not know the exact American target, whether the Marianas, the Western Carolines, or New Guinea, but they were desperate for answers. Their once proud carrier force had been shattered, their island garrisons isolated, and their options dwindling. Submarines had become one of the few tools left to gather information and harass U.S. forces. The plan was simple. Each submarine would hold its station, watch, and report. But what seemed like a logical defense was in fact a deadly weakness. Unlike American submarines, which operated with freedom and flexibility, the Japanese boats were tied to rigid positions. And in those fixed stations, they would soon become targets, waiting helplessly for the hunters that were already closing in. Japanese strategists studying recent American carrier strikes believed Western New Guinea would be the next target. Admiral Somu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, ordered Operation Eigo, a decisive naval plan meant to stop the US advance and defend Japan's inner line of islands, the Marianas, the Western Carolines, and New Guinea itself. But the plan was built on a weak foundation. Japan's air arm had never recovered from earlier battles. Skilled pilots lost at Midway, the Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz were gone forever, replaced by men pushed through training too quickly to master their craft. In contrast, American pilot training had become a massive machine, turning out thousands of well-prepared aviators. Technology, too, was against Japan. The US Navy's F-6F Hellcats outclassed Japanese fighters, while American carriers bristled with radar-guided anti-aircraft guns that made attacking them nearly suicidal. To support Eigo, Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi, commander of the submarine fleet, ordered 7 boats to form a scouting barrier known as the NA Line. Once, Japan's submarines had been among the best in the world, with excellent torpedoes and highly skilled crews. But years of heavy losses had eroded that advantage. New crews lacked experience, and the doctrine of striking warships rather than supply vessels left Japan at a fatal disadvantage. While US submarines strangled Japan's shipping lanes, Japanese boats were being destroyed with little impact in return. Even worse, these 7 submarines were locked into fixed positions instead of being allowed to roam freely. That rigidity would soon doom them. The chain of events that sealed their fate began with a simple report. Japanese forces intercepted an American plane's sighting of submarine RO-104. In response, Tokyo sent a radio order shifting the entire NA line 60 miles southeast, giving exact coordinates for each submarine's new position. That transmission, like so many before it, was intercepted by American codebreakers. At the Joint Intelligence Center in the Pacific, cryptanalysts worked with precision, decoding not only the words but also the Japanese Navy's grid system. Within hours, they had the exact positions of every submarine in the line. For the first time in the Pacific War, this kind of secret intelligence was passed directly to the hunters at sea. It was a dangerous gamble. If Japan realized its codes were broken, it would change them immediately, and this priceless advantage would vanish. To protect the secret, elaborate cover stories were prepared. Crews were told the contacts came from aircraft sightings or routine patrols, never knowing that their targets were revealed by some of the war's most guarded information. The hunter-killer group, USS George, USS Raby, and USS England, were all new ships, part of a massive construction effort that produced more than 150 Buckley-class escorts. Small, fast, and armed with the latest sonar and weapons, these ships were built for one purpose: to hunt submarines. And now, armed with intelligence more accurate than ever before, they were heading straight for their prey. The Buckley-class escorts were born from balance, fast to build, simple enough for commercial shipyards, yet powerful enough to stalk submarines. They were smaller than fleet destroyers and not as fast, but their diesel-electric engines gave them long legs, allowing them to patrol for weeks without fuel. Armed with sonar, depth charges, and Hedgehog projectors, they were made to hunt. But what gave them spirit was not just their steel, it was their names. Each carried the memory of a fallen hero, a reminder that these ships sailed not only for victory, but also for those who never came home. USS George bore the name of Seaman Second Class Eugene F. George. In November 1942, during the brutal nighttime battle off Guadalcanal, George manned his anti-aircraft gun aboard USS San Francisco. A Japanese bomber, already aflame, turned itself into a suicide weapon and plunged toward the cruiser's bridge. George and his crew did not flinch. They fired until the last instant, until the planes slammed into the ship, killing Admiral Daniel Callahan and his staff. George died at his post, still fighting. For his courage, he received the Navy Cross, and his name lived on in the escort that carried it into war. USS Raby honored Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby, a pioneer in anti-submarine warfare during World War I. He had commanded the very first American convoy across the Atlantic, proving that submarines could be defeated with discipline and teamwork. His tactics shaped naval strategy for decades, but he never lived to see the Second Great War. He died in an accident in 1934, yet the ship that bore his name carried his legacy into a new fight against submarines. USS England carried perhaps the most heartbreaking story. She was named for Ensign John Charles England, only 20 years old, who died at Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, he traded shifts with a friend so the other man could be with his visiting family. England himself was waiting for his wife and infant daughter, whom he had never seen. When torpedoes ripped into USS Oklahoma and the battleship rolled over, he escaped to the deck. But hearing cries from men still trapped below, he went back inside. Once, twice, 3 times he plunged into the flooding, oil-filled passageways, guiding sailors to safety. In the darkness of the dying ship, he saved 3 lives. On his 4th attempt, he did not return. The crews of George, Raby, and England knew these names. They knew the sacrifices behind them, and as their ships sailed into danger, those names gave every man aboard a reason to fight harder, endure longer, and face whatever lay ahead with courage. On his 4th descent into the dark, flooding compartments of USS Oklahoma, Ensign John England never returned. He was one of 429 men lost aboard the battleship that morning at Pearl Harbor. The tragedy of Oklahoma was among the most haunting of the attack. As the great ship rolled onto her side, hundreds of sailors were trapped inside, clinging to life in small air pockets. For days after the attack, salvage crews heard faint tapping from within the overturned hull, desperate signals from men waiting in the darkness. Cutting torches and drills worked furiously, and 32 sailors were saved. But for most, including John England, no rescue came. He was buried among the unknown dead at Punchbowl National Cemetery in Hawaii, his name etched into memory, but his remains unidentified for decades. It was not until 2016 that DNA technology brought closure. His body was finally returned to Colorado Springs, where he was laid to rest beside his parents. Though the Navy awarded him only a Purple Heart, his sacrifice was honored in another way. 2 warships would carry his name: the destroyer escort USS England DE-635, and later the guided missile cruiser USS England CG-22. His spirit lived on every time a crewman spoke the ship's name. The destroyer escort class that bore his legacy was designed for one mission above all others: hunting submarines. Though armed with 3 3-inch guns and torpedoes, their true power came from their anti-submarine weapons. Depth charge racks lined their stern, K-gun projectors could launch explosives to either side, and, most importantly, they carried the new Mark 10 Hedgehog mortar. Unlike depth charges, which exploded at set depths, the Hedgehog fired a pattern of contact-fused bombs ahead of the ship, detonating only if they struck a submarine. It was a weapon that changed the nature of the hunt. The Buckley class was a product of lessons learned in the Battle of the Atlantic, where German U-boats had once brought Britain to the brink of starvation. The Allies had discovered that to beat the undersea menace, they needed ships built specifically for the task, vessels with endurance for long ocean escorts, stability for rough seas, and the most advanced detection equipment of the time. The Buckleys were all of these things, and more. Now 3 of them, George, Raby, and England, were moving into position, armed with the weapons, training, and determination to take on Japan's submarine line. What they did next would enter the record books. The Buckley-class escorts carried all the lessons of earlier battles in a design that could be built by the hundreds in American shipyards. Their most important weapon was the Hedgehog mortar, a British invention born from desperation during the darkest days of the Atlantic War. When U-boats were sending merchant ships to the bottom faster than they could be replaced, Britain's engineers searched for something new, something that could turn the tide. By 1942, the answer had arrived. The Hedgehog looked almost harmless at first glance, its launcher bristling with rows of stubby projectiles that earned it its curious name. But when fired, those 24 bombs spread out in a deadly oval pattern, splashing into the sea 200 to 300 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Each carried 35 pounds of explosive packed inside a 65-pound shell. Timed to strike the water together, they created a curtain of destruction beneath the waves, covering an area large enough to trap any submarine caught in their path. What made the Hedgehog so different was not its size or range, but its fuse. Unlike depth charges, which exploded at preset depths whether they hit their target or not, Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on impact.
A hit meant an instant explosion.
A miss meant silence. There was no more waiting for minutes, watching the surface for oil slicks or rising debris to confirm a kill. Commanders knew at once if their weapons had struck home. Just as important, the system could be reloaded in 3 minutes, letting the hunters fire again and again until their prey was destroyed. For the first time in naval history, surface ships had a weapon that could match the stealth and cunning of the submarine. The balance of the undersea war was shifting, and soon, the crew of USS England would prove just how deadly this new weapon could be. The Buckley class escorts carried all the lessons of earlier battles in a design that could be built by the hundreds in American shipyards. Their most important weapon was the Hedgehog mortar, a British invention born from desperation during the darkest days of the Atlantic War. When U-boats were sending merchant ships to the bottom faster than they could be replaced, Britain's engineers searched for something new, something that could turn the tide. By 1942, the answer had arrived. The Hedgehog looked almost harmless at first glance, its launcher bristling with rows of stubby projectiles that earned it its curious name. But when fired, those 24 bombs spread out in a deadly oval pattern, splashing into the sea 200 to 300 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Each carried 35 pounds of explosive packed inside a 65-pound shell. Timed to strike the water together, they created a curtain of destruction beneath the waves, covering an area large enough to trap any submarine caught in their path. What made the Hedgehog so different was not its size or range, but its fuse. Unlike depth charges, which exploded at preset depths whether they hit their target or not, Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on impact.
A hit meant an instant explosion.
A miss meant silence. There was no more waiting for minutes, watching the surface for oil slicks or rising debris to confirm a kill. Commanders knew at once if their weapons had struck home. Just as important, the system could be reloaded in 3 minutes, letting the hunters fire again and again until their prey was destroyed. For the first time in naval history, surface ships had a weapon that could match the stealth and cunning of the submarine. The balance of the undersea war was shifting, and soon the crew of USS England would prove just how deadly this new weapon could be. Yokoyama's tiny craft never came back, his fate forever lost to the sea. Signals believed to be his were picked up after the attack, first claiming success, then admitting navigation failure. But when the war ended and records were examined, the truth emerged. None of the submarines sent into Pearl Harbor struck a single American warship. One was sunk by the destroyer Ward in the first shots of the Pacific War. Another was rammed and destroyed inside the harbor by Monaghan. One ran aground, its lone survivor becoming the first Japanese prisoner captured by America. 2 more simply vanished beneath the waves. Of the 10 men who set out, only 1 lived beyond that day. Yet the idea of these secret weapons did not die. 6 months later, I-16 finally tasted the success denied at Pearl Harbor. Operating far away in the Indian Ocean, she launched another midget submarine during the assault on Madagascar. This time the torpedoes found their mark, striking the battleship HMS Ramillies. The veteran of the First World War nearly sank under the weight of 100 to 800 tons of flooding. Though saved by her crew and destined to fight again at Normandy, the strike proved the Japanese method could work. The midget also sank a tanker before vanishing with its own crew, a reminder of the heavy price such missions demanded. Through 1942 and 1943, I-16 shifted roles. She delivered supplies to starving garrisons cut off by advancing American forces and carried out attacks whenever possible. In November 1942, one of her small craft torpedoed the cargo ship Alchiba, loaded with aviation fuel and ammunition. The American vessel burned for days but survived. Later, I-16 even helped cover the evacuation of Guadalcanal. But the proud fleet submarines of Japan had been reduced to hauling rice and medicine to doomed soldiers clinging to jungle outposts. The war was slipping away, and each run through seas now dominated by Allied ships and aircraft was a gamble with death. By 1944, the missions had become desperate. On May 14th, I-16 left Truk Lagoon under the command of Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka. Her cargo was not torpedoes or weapons, but rice stuffed in rubber bags for the 40,000 troops trapped on Bougainville. The garrison had been isolated for months, starving, sick, even driven to cannibalism. But American intelligence had cracked Japan's codes. I-16's departure was no secret. Her end had already been written. On May 19th, the trap closed. A patrol plane, a PBY Catalina, spotted her running on the surface to charge her weak batteries. It was a fatal necessity. Japan's submarines were too slow underwater, too fragile to remain hidden for long. 3 American destroyer escorts were already sweeping the area, forming a line across the ocean, their sonar creating an invisible net that few submarines could escape. At 1:35 in the afternoon, England's sonar operator, a farm boy from Iowa who had never seen the sea before the war, heard it, the hard, metallic echo of a submarine beneath the waves. The hunt was on. I-16 plunged deep, twisting, turning, fighting to break free. Inside, Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi pushed his crew through every maneuver they had drilled for. Sudden depth changes, sharp turns, bursts of speed, all the desperate tricks that had saved submarines before. Above, England closed in, her commander calling the attack run. The crew worked as one, sonar tracking, plotters calculating, the Hedgehog crew bracing to fire. The first salvo roared forward, 24 deadly bombs crashing into the sea. Seconds stretched like hours, but no explosions came. I-16 had escaped, slipping beneath the deadly pattern. The battle had only begun. The second attack run failed. I-16 twisted and fought like a cornered animal, spewing decoy bubbles, diving steeply, then rocketing upward, its hull groaning as it pushed to the edge of its limits. England's Hedgehog splashed harmlessly into the sea. On the third attempt, one projectile struck home. The blast tore through the submarine's dark interior, throwing men against steel walls, shattering bulbs, rattling valves and flooding compartments. Inside, chaos reigned, but the Japanese crew fought back with discipline drilled into them through endless training. Damage was controlled, watertight doors sealed, and the submarine pressed on, wounded but alive. Pendleton refused to relent. A fourth run was set, the crew working with machine-like focus. But once again, the salvo missed.
I-16 slipped beneath the pattern and vanished into the depths.
The battle dragged on, stretching past an hour. Tension weighed on every man aboard England. They knew the submarine was there, trapped, hunted, but elusive. In the plotting room, officers bent over charts, trying to predict the enemy commander's next move. On sonar, young sailors strained against static, ears ringing with the relentless pings, trying not to lose contact. The Japanese commander was fighting with skill and ferocity, using the ocean itself as his shield. He drove his submarine deeper toward the thermal layers where temperature shifts bent sonar beams, masking his position. It was a desperate gamble, but England's crew had begun to read his moves. They noticed a rhythm in his maneuvers, a sharp port turn with every dive, a preference for certain depth bands. At 2:35 p.m., Pendleton ordered the fifth attack run. The crew fired. Seconds later, the sea exploded. The blasts were so violent that England's stern lifted completely out of the water, throwing sailors to the deck and shaking the ship from bow to stern. The thunder rolled across the ocean, felt by the other escorts miles away. For 20 long minutes, the surface lay silent. Then the sea began to bleed.
Oil spread in slicks.
Rice bags floated upward, bobbing among fragments of wood, insulation, and shattered equipment. Among the wreckage were personal artifacts, a sailor's cap, the torn pages of a Japanese book, a lone wooden sandal. Haunting reminders that beneath the waves, 107 men had gone to their deaths. I-16, the submarine that had helped launch the first strike at Pearl Harbor, was gone. Her final mission, to deliver sacks of rice to starving soldiers, had ended in fire and ruin, a weapon of war reduced to a supply boat, destroyed for a cause already lost. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, another group of submarines was already at sea, the NA line. 7 Japanese boats, all smaller RO-class submarines, had departed Saipan just 2 days earlier, sent to watch for the approach of American carriers. Before leaving, each commander had stood before Vice Admiral Takagi, receiving a ceremonial cup of sake and a white headband marked with patriotic slogans. They knew the truth. The odds of survival were nearly zero. These RO-class submarines were relics of pre-war thinking, sturdy but few, armed with 4 torpedo tubes and a small deck gun. They carried no radar of their own, relying on fragile detectors and human eyes to scan the horizon. To find the enemy, they would have to surface, exposing themselves to aircraft and radar-equipped hunters. Of the 20 built, not one would live to see the end of the war. The first to fall was RO-106, a veteran of earlier battles. In July 1943, she had torpedoed the American landing ship LST-342 near New Georgia, detonating its ammunition in a fireball so immense it split the ship in half. One section sank instantly, the other barely surviving to be dragged ashore. Among the 121 men killed were the ship's entire mess division of African-American sailors and Lieutenant Commander McClellan Barclay, the famous artist who had set aside a career designing America's most iconic recruiting posters to fight at sea. RO-106 had even survived severe depth charge damage later that year, limping back to port, repaired, and returned to service. Now she was heading into the vast Pacific once more. But like I-16 before her, she was already sailing toward a fate from which there would be no return. In the pre-dawn blackness of May 22, 1944, at 0350 hours, USS George's radar picked up a contact, a lone vessel cutting across the surface. It was RO-106, running on batteries exposed in the darkness. The submarine's crew had taken the risk all submariners dreaded, surfacing to recharge. Seconds later, George's searchlight pierced the night with a searing white beam. The Japanese submarine was caught in the open, her crew stunned, their eyes still adapted to the dark.
RO-106's radar detector had failed, leaving her blind to the approaching hunter. Panic flashed across the submarine's bridge. Alarms sounded, orders were shouted, and the officer of the deck screamed for an emergency dive.
Men scrambled below, hatches slammed, and ballast tanks vented. Within 40 seconds, the boat slipped beneath the waves, fast by peacetime standards, but not fast enough. At 04:15, George launched a Hedgehog attack. The projectiles splashed harmlessly into the sea as RO-106 zigzagged deep, the submarine twisting violently in an effort to escape. 10 minutes later, USS England gained sonar contact. The ping confirmed it. RO-106 was still trapped below. She was pushing hard, making 8 knots, weaving frantically through the depths. England's first attack run missed, but then the Japanese commander made a fatal mistake. RO-106 reversed course and turned bow on toward England, likely attempting to fire torpedoes at her pursuer. But the Japanese captain misunderstood the weapon he was facing. Hedgehogs didn't fall behind a ship like depth charges. They fired forward, blanketing the sea ahead. By charging straight toward her attacker, RO-106 had placed herself directly in the kill zone. At 04:36, England's second salvo struck home. At least 3 projectiles slammed into the submarine's hull. The effect inside was apocalyptic. Explosions ripping through compartments, seawater crashing in under immense pressure, electrical panels bursting in showers of sparks. Within seconds, the boat's pressure hull collapsed. RO-106 was torn apart as she plunged into the abyss, taking all 49 men with her. The entire action, from first radar contact to her destruction, lasted only 36 minutes, but the hunt wasn't over. The very next day, May 23rd, brought a new contact, RO-104, under the command of Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi. Unlike many of her sisters, RO-104 had a notable history. She had patrolled the icy waters of the North Pacific and, in November 1943, had pulled off a daring rescue, saving 75 survivors of the cruiser Sendai after it was lost at the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. Among those saved was Rear Admiral Baron Matsuji Ijuin, a prized survivor for the Imperial Navy. Now, far from those frozen seas, she prowled the warm waters north of New Ireland. At 06:04, an Allied patrol aircraft spotted her on the surface. This time, the radar detector worked. Alarms shrieked, lookouts shouted, and RO-104 dove just as the destroyers raced to close the distance. The chase was on. Raby made the first run, sonar guiding her weapons in, but RO-104's captain had studied the fate of his comrades. He threw his submarine into violent maneuvers and unleashed a secret weapon, bursts of tuned sound pulses designed to jam sonar. It was crude but effective. Raby attacked 4 times over 2 hours, every salvo missing. Then George took her turn. The destroyer escort pressed the attack with determination, hammering RO-104 with 5 separate Hedgehog barrages. Each time, the sea boiled with explosions, but when the echoes cleared, the submarine was still there, twisting and turning, her captain fighting with every ounce of skill he possessed. For hours, RO-104 evaded destruction. Her commander knew the odds, but he also knew the truth. He was only delaying the inevitable. Each desperate maneuver drained RO-104's batteries and poisoned her air supply further. Inside the steel hull, the atmosphere thickened with carbon dioxide. Every breath came harder as the men struggled in the stifling darkness. Their captain had bought them precious hours, but he knew time was no ally. At 08:19, USS England took her turn. The first Hedgehog pattern missed, but the submarine had been under watch for over 2 hours, and England's sonar operators had been studying her movements with meticulous precision. They had cracked her rhythm. RO-104 always favored a dive to starboard, held between 200 and 250 feet, and surged speed just before a major course change. The hunters laid their trap. On the second attack run, England's Hedgehogs fell directly into the submarine's path. Between 10 and 12 projectiles struck home. The ocean erupted with crushing detonations, followed by the horrific sounds that confirmed the kill. Metal tearing under immense pressure, compartments imploding in thunderous bursts, then silence. It wasn't until 10:45 that the ocean gave up its proof. An oil slick spread wide across the surface, littered with wreckage, wooden planks, insulation, scraps of clothing. Among them drifted a life ring, Japanese characters still legible, sealing RO-104's fate. All 58 men were gone. In just 4 days, the hunter-killer group had annihilated 3 submarines. Their efficiency was becoming chillingly clear. But the ocean was not yet done offering prey. On May 24th, the sea delivered another target, RO-116, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Shibuya Kuno. Unlike her seasoned sisters, RO-116 was young. Commissioned only 6 months earlier, she was crewed largely by fresh graduates, men who had joined the submarine service with visions of honor and triumph. Now, reality set in, Japan was on the defensive, and their inexperience would soon prove fatal. At Ira 20, George's radar picked her up at an astonishing 17,000 yards, nearly 10 miles away. Favorable atmospheric conditions had amplified the radar's reach, leaving RO-116 no chance of surprise.
Alarm bells rang. Orders shouted. She crash-dived.
But the descent was sluggish, betraying her crew's greenness. At 01:15, George had sonar contact, barely 750 yards away. The submarine fought hard, throwing her rudder wildly, plunging and climbing, even deploying sonar-jamming bursts. George's first attacks were thrown off, her quarry twisting away at the last second. Then, England joined the chase. Twice she lined up for attack, only to abort when the firing solution collapsed in the chaos of evasive maneuvers. Still, the pattern was emerging. The Green crew's tactics were erratic, but their repetition gave them away. The Americans were learning with every pass. At 02:14, England struck.
At least 3 Hedgehog projectiles punched into the hull.
Unlike the violent ends of RO-106 and RO-104, this destruction was eerily muted.
No sympathetic torpedo explosions, no chain reaction of blasts. RO-116 simply came apart, swallowed whole by the deep.
All 56 aboard were lost, vanishing into the Pacific without a trace of fire. The kill tally mounted. And 2 days later, on May 26th, the hunters would find yet another RO-108, commanded by Lieutenant Wari Konichi. RO-108 was no stranger to danger, or to drawing American blood. On October 3rd, 1943, she had executed a textbook ambush in Huon Gulf, New Guinea. 3 American destroyers steamed in formation, their overlapping profiles the perfect target. Listening to their sonar pings echoing across the sea, RO-108's captain maneuvered into position, loosed a spread of 4 torpedoes, and waited. USS Smith's lookout spotted the wakes in time, her captain ordering flank speed and a hard turn to comb through the deadly streaks of foam. She survived. But USS Henley was not so lucky. 2 torpedoes slammed into her port side amidships, erupting in the number 1 fire room. The blasts ripped through fuel tanks, flooding compartments and snapping the ship's keel. Within minutes, Henley broke apart, sinking beneath the waves and taking 15 sailors with her. Another 52 were wounded in the chaos. Smith and USS Reed counterattacked, depth charges hammering the sea, but RO-108 had already slipped away into the abyss, silent and unseen. Her luck nearly ran out months later. On December 17, 1943, a PBY Catalina patrol plane caught her on the surface. The flying boat's depth charges straddled the submarine, tearing open plates along her stern. Water gushed in, the boat going down by the stern, men sloshing through flooding compartments to shore bulkheads and patch leaks. Against all odds, the crew saved her. After months in repair at Truk, RO-108 returned to service, scarred but still in the fight. Bulkheads and patch leaks. Against all odds, the crew saved her. After months in repair at Truk, RO-108 returned to service, scarred but still in the fight. That fight ended on May 26, 1944. At 23:03 hours, USS Rabi picked her up on radar at 15,000 yards, nearly 9 miles northeast of Seidler Harbor. USS England quickly confirmed the contact.
Row 108 crash-dived, pushing her engines for every knot of submerged speed she could muster, but the hunters had her.
At 1,050 yards, England's sonar locked on. Raby went in first. Her Hedgehog salvo erupted ahead of her bow, but RO 108's captain had nerves of steel. Timing it perfectly, he turned inside the attack run, slipping clear of the pattern. For a moment, it seemed she might pull off another escape. At 23:23, England moved in. The sonar pings grew sharper, closer. Her crew had perfected their deadly routine, and this time there would be no drawn-out chase. The first Hedgehog salvo scored between 4 and 6 direct hits.
Explosions ripped through the already weakened hull.
RO 108 was torn apart instantly. All 53 men aboard perished in the dark waters. By now, Japanese naval intelligence was alarmed. On May 27th, they intercepted American radio traffic, messages that carried an unmistakable tone of triumph. Several submarines lost.
A jubilant enemy.
The warnings flashed across multiple frequencies, desperate pleas for the surviving boats to withdraw from the NA line. RO 112 and RO 109 heeded the call, fleeing the killing ground. Their survival was only temporary. RO 112 would later be sunk by USS Batfish off Luzon on February 11, 1945. RO 109 would meet her end off Okinawa that May. Both were living on borrowed time, but RO 105 remained. Whether her captain never received the warnings or whether he refused to abandon his station with a division commander aboard, no one would ever know. She had sailed from Saipan on May 14th with Captain Ryanosuke Kato, commander of Submarine Division 51, embarked. With a senior officer watching, retreat was not an option. Duty demanded she hold her post, no matter the cost. It would be a fatal choice. RO 105 had danced with death before. In August 1943, she had barely escaped 2 perfectly aimed torpedoes from USS Tarpon, her sharp-eyed lookout spotting the wakes just in time. A month later, she tried her own hand at the hunt, firing torpedoes at the cruiser USS Columbia, only to watch the American ship twist away. She had even risked surfacing in daylight to pluck down Japanese aviators from the sea, daring rescues that earned her the gratitude of Japan's airmen. But now, with the destruction of RO 108 fresh in memory, the hunters came for her. The 3 destroyer escorts, George, Raby,
and England, rushed back to Seidler Harbour to replenish their depleted Hedgehog stocks. Ammunition was loaded with frantic urgency.
Every minute spent in port was a minute an enemy submarine could escape or strike. Rearmed and fueled, they steamed out again, joining a larger hunter-killer force built around the escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay. With destroyers Hazelwood, Haggard, Hull, and McCord, plus the escort Spangler, the group now had teeth in the sky. Hoggett Bay's aircraft could sweep the ocean, pouncing on any submarine sighted and guiding the surface ships in for the kill. On the night of May 30th, Hazelwood's radar picked up a contact. It was RO 105, the submarine crash-dived, beginning one of the most prolonged hunts of the entire war.
Hours of relentless pursuit followed, the sea above her churned by exploding depth charges and Hedgehog salvos.
RO 105's captain fought like a master duelist, discharging debris and oil to fool sonar, twisting through radical turns that bent the limits of his pressure hull. Each maneuver pushed his crew closer to exhaustion, yet the boat held together. Hazelwood rained depth charges, geysers rising like thunder around her, but RO 105 slipped free. George struck with Hedgehogs, at least 3 projectiles detonating close aboard. Inside the submarine, compartments shook, men thrown against steel bulkheads. Somehow the crew contained the flooding, kept the boat alive. Japanese submarines were built tough with watertight compartments that gave them resilience Western commanders sometimes underestimated. Dawn rose over a deceptively calm sea. Spangler and England joined the attack. A thin oil slick marked RO-105's trail, proof she was wounded but still fighting. Spangler unleashed her Hedgehogs, but the submarine twisted clear in the final seconds. It was then that Commander Walton Haynes, still aboard George, sent a message that would pass into naval legend. "Oh,
hell, go ahead, England."
The words carried both humor and respect. 6 times before, England had struck, and 6 submarines lay at the bottom because of her. If any ship could finish RO-105, it was her. The crew of England had watched through the long night, memorizing RO-105's evasions, the slight pause before a hard turn, the depth bands she favored under fire. They were ready. At 07:36, England attacked. Her Hedgehogs thundered into the water in a deadly pattern. A heartbeat later, the ocean erupted in the most violent explosion yet. 6 to 10 projectiles punched into the submarine's hull. Then came secondary detonations as RO-105's own torpedoes went off, amplifying the destruction. The blast dwarfed even the spectacular demise of I-16. Steel shattered, compartments imploded, and RO-105 ceased to exist. She went down with every soul aboard. Lieutenant Eno, Captain Cato, and more than 60 men, another submarine erased from the Pacific in a storm of fire and steel. The explosion that ended RO-105 was unlike anything the hunters had yet seen. A column of water shot skyward, towering hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave rolled outward across the Pacific, rattling hulls miles away. In that instant, RO-105 ceased to exist. Captain Cato and all 55 men lost in a single,
violent heartbeat. Debris spread for miles across the surface, fragments of hull plating.
Shattered decking, oil spreading in thick black pools. Among the wreckage were the personal effects of her crew, mute reminders of the human lives erased beneath the waves. It was total destruction, the kind of finality modern naval warfare could deliver in a single strike. In just 12 days, June 19th to May 31st, 1944, the destroyer escort USS England had sunk 6 Japanese submarines.
No ship in history, before or since,
has matched that feat, and she was not a mighty battleship or fleet destroyer, but a 5-month-old escort, barely broken in on her first war patrol. The numbers told the story starkly. 7 submarines sent to form the NA line,
6 destroyed, 5 of them by England.
Only RO-109 escaped, only to be hunted down less than a year later. Word of the achievement reached the highest levels of the Navy. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message that would become a promise. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. It was both a tribute to the crew's achievement and to the man whose name the ship bore, Ensign John C. England, killed at Pearl Harbor while rescuing his shipmates. The crew of England received the Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 destroyer escorts so honored in the entire war. The citation praised their extraordinary heroism and their vital contribution to the success of the Pacific Campaign. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton was awarded the Navy Cross for his command, though many noted his executive officer John A. Williamson
had been just as crucial, drilling the crew endlessly,
sharpening their skills until they became the deadliest submarine hunters in the Navy. But the significance of England's victories went beyond medals. Strategically, the loss of the NA line submarines fooled the Japanese High Command. Convinced a major American fleet was bound for the Carolines or New Guinea, Admiral Toyoda misdirected his fleet. When the truth became clear, it was too late. On June 15th, American forces stormed Saipan. 4 days later, in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japanese naval aviation was annihilated. More than 400 planes lost in what US pilots called the Marianas Turkey Shoot. 3 carriers went down. Japan's naval air arm would never recover. The fall of the Marianas placed B-29 bombers within range of Tokyo, sealing Japan's fate. Though the Navy tried to keep England's success secret, lest the Japanese realized their codes were compromised, the enemy soon suspected the truth. Japanese intelligence reports acknowledged that radio intercepts had played a role. Incredibly, they clung to the belief that their main codes were still safe. That illusion would cost them dearly in the final year of the war, as American cryptographers continued to read their messages and guide the hunters in for the kill. The story of USS England is more than a tale of ships and submarines. It is a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the relentless determination of ordinary men asked to do the extraordinary. In 12 days, in a lonely stretch of Pacific Ocean, they wrote their names into naval history. And as long as stories of courage at sea are told, the name England and the men who sailed her will never be forgotten.